I flew to Vegas and found my son dying while my daughter-in-law parted. I never imagined those words would become the story of my life, yet here I am, living a nightmare I wouldn't wish on anyone. When the call came in that night, my world split into two: the life I knew before that moment and everything that followed. It was nearly midnight when my phone rang, and the sound alone made my chest tighten. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. At my age, late-night calls never bring good news. Sir, this is the emergency department at St. Rose Hospital in Las Vegas. Are you the father of Daniel Carter? I remember my throat closing, struggling to form words. Yes, I am. Your son has been admitted. You need to come as soon as possible. There was no explanation, no comfort. Just those cold words that made my entire body go numb. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter until my knuckles turned white, my heart pounding like a drum in my ears. Is he okay? I asked, almost whispering, terrified of the answer. There was a pause. Then the nurse replied, "He's critical, sir. Please, get here quickly." Critical. That word kept echoing in my head, louder with each passing second. I didn't bother packing much. I grabbed my wallet, my keys, and the photo of Daniel from the mantelpiece, the one from his graduation day where he stood grinning in his cap and gown, so full of life and promise. That image clashed violently with the reality I was being thrown into. On the drive to the airport, my mind raced. I kept thinking about everything I'd done for Daniel over the years. The extra shifts I worked to pay for his tuition, the down payment I helped him make on his first house, even the wedding I practically funded because his wife insisted on something perfect and unforgettable. I'd done it all without complaint because he was my son, my pride. But somewhere deep inside, a cold dread was creeping in, because I couldn't stop thinking about her, my daughter-in-law, Jessica. It had been months since we last spoke, and even then, her voice was sharp, impatient, always dripping with entitlement. She'd treated me like an ATM for years, and yet I pushed my doubts aside, telling myself that she loved my son, that she'd be there for him. By the time my plane touched down in Las Vegas, I was praying she'd be at the hospital, holding Daniel's hand, refusing to leave his side. That's what a loving wife would do. That's what I needed to believe. But when I arrived, reality shattered whatever fragile hope I had left. Daniel was hooked up to tubes and machines, his skin pale and clammy, his breaths shallow. And Jessica, nowhere to be found. That was the moment I knew something was terribly, unforgivably wrong. I boarded the earliest flight to Las Vegas, my heart pounding so violently it felt as though my chest would burst. Every second on the clock, a reminder that my son was fighting for his life while I was trapped thousands of feet in the air, helpless. The hum of the engines was deafening. Yet beneath that constant roar was an even louder silence filled with memories I couldn't escape. As the plane ascended, I found myself staring blankly out the window, replaying every sacrifice I had made for Daniel's future, each memory slicing through me like glass. I thought of the years I spent working 2 jobs, the sleepless nights when my body ached and my hands trembled from exhaustion. Also, Daniel would have the kind of opportunities I never did. I remembered how I sold my late wife's jewelry to help him pay for college because he was too proud to take out a loan, how I gave up my retirement fund so he and Jessica could afford their dream wedding, and how I covered the down payment on their house so they wouldn't start their marriage buried in debt. I did it all without hesitation because that's what a father does. That's what I believed family was supposed to mean. Yet as the clouds stretched endlessly outside the small oval window, a darker thought kept gnawing at me, a thought I kept trying to push away but couldn't. Where was Jessica? She had never once called me since Daniel was admitted. Not a single text, not even a voicemail. In the 2 years they had been married, she had always been demanding, always chasing luxury, always talking about status, parties, and vacations. But I had convinced myself that beneath her vanity there was love. I wanted to believe she cared about Daniel the way he cared about her. But the silence now was deafening, and in that silence dread grew. My hands shook as I held the small photograph of Daniel I had tucked into my jacket pocket, the same one I'd grabbed from the mantel before leaving home. His graduation day. He was smiling so brightly in that picture, full of hope and promise, and all I could think was how unfair it was that he was lying in a hospital bed while she, for reasons I couldn't yet face, wasn't by his side. The plane felt unbearably slow, every minute stretching longer than the last, my body restless, my mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. What if I didn't make it in time? What if the last words I'd ever get to say to my son would be whispered into the void? I closed my eyes and prayed silently, my knuckles gripping the armrest so tightly they ached. But even as I prayed, a cold voice inside me whispered that something about this entire situation didn't make sense, that the truth waiting for me in Vegas would destroy everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and love. The automatic doors slid open, and a blast of cold, sterile air hit me as I stepped into St. Rose Hospital, my chest tightening with every step I took toward the reception desk, my entire body trembling with dread. The fluorescent lights above felt harsh, almost blinding, yet everything around me was strangely muted, like the world itself was holding its breath. I hurried to the counter, my voice unsteady as I gave Daniel's name, my palms slick with sweat despite the chill in the air. The nurse glanced at her monitor, then looked at me with eyes too calm for the chaos inside me. "Room 407, intensive care," she said softly, and I nodded without speaking, afraid that if I opened my mouth, my voice would break. The walk down that hallway felt endless, my footsteps echoing on the polished floor as my heartbeat thundered in my ears. When I finally pushed open the door, the sight before me nearly brought me to my knees. My son, my boy, my Daniel was lying motionless on the hospital bed, his skin pale and ashen, his lips cracked, a maze of tubes and wires surrounding him like cold, merciless vines. Machines beeped steadily beside him, and with each sound, I felt my own breath catch in my throat. I took a step closer, gripping the edge of the bed for balance, my fingers trembling as I reached out and touched his hand. It was cold, too cold. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Dad's here, son. I'm here." His eyelids fluttered but didn't open, his breathing shallow and strained, as though every breath was a battle he wasn't sure he could win. My chest ached with a pain so deep I thought it would consume me. I glanced around the room, hoping to see Jessica, his wife, at his side, holding his hand, refusing to leave him, but the chair beside the bed was empty. There was no handbag on the floor, no discarded coffee cup, no sign she had been there at all. Confusion turned quickly to disbelief, then to anger that burned hot and sharp in my gut. How could she not be here? How could she leave him alone in this state? I turned to the nurse as she adjusted one of Daniel's IV lines and asked where Jessica was, my voice tight with desperation. The nurse hesitated, her expression shifting uncomfortably before she finally said, "She hasn't been here since this morning, sir. I believe she said she had plans." Plans. The word hit me like a blow to the chest. a cruel mockery of everything my son was enduring. My hands clenched into fists, and I struggled to steady my breathing, forcing myself to stay focused on Daniel, to push down the tidal wave of rage threatening to take over. I brushed his hair back gently, whispering promises that I wouldn't leave him, that I'd stay right here no matter what, even as an icy dread began to crawl up my spine. Something wasn't right. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. I stood frozen beside Daniel's bed, my hand still resting on his frail fingers, the steady rhythm of the heart monitor, the only thing reminding me he was still here, still fighting, while everything inside me was collapsing. I turned slowly to the nurse, my voice low and strained as I asked again where Jessica was, hoping I had misheard her the first time, praying there was some logical explanation for her absence. The nurse hesitated, shifting uncomfortably under my gaze before finally speaking, her voice soft but edged with something she seemed to be holding back. "Sir," she began carefully, "Jessica left earlier this afternoon. She said she was meeting friends for a party." For a moment, I didn't understand the words. A party? I stared at her, waiting for her to correct herself, to tell me she meant something else, anything else, but she didn't. She just looked at me with quiet sympathy, and in that silence, reality struck like a lightning bolt tearing through my chest. Jessica, my son's wife, the woman who had vowed to love him in sickness and in health, had walked out of this hospital and into a party while Daniel lay here dying. My throat went dry, my heart hammering so violently I thought I might collapse right there. "A party," I repeated slowly, my voice trembling with disbelief. The nurse nodded reluctantly and glanced toward the door as though afraid someone might overhear. "I heard her on the phone in the hallway earlier," she admitted softly. "She was laughing, talking about bottle service and VIP tables. She said she didn't want to spend her night stuck in a hospital room." Her words ripped through me like shards of glass. My mind reeled, fragments of every sacrifice I had ever made for Daniel and, by extension, for her, flashing before my eyes, the tuition payments, the down payment on their home, the extravagant wedding she had demanded, and I had given without hesitation, the constant little loans and financial rescues whenever she came up short because her lifestyle couldn't be maintained on her salary. I had done it all, believing she loved my son, believing she was his partner, his support, his safe place. And now, while he lay here struggling to breathe, she was out drinking champagne and dancing under strobe lights as though nothing was wrong. A cold, dark fury began to take shape deep inside me, twisting tighter with every passing second. I clenched the railing of Daniel's bed so hard my knuckles turned white, forcing myself to stay silent because if I spoke, the rage in my voice would echo through the halls. I glanced at my son's face, pale and fragile, and for the first time, I wondered how long he had been suffering like this while she lived as though she were single, untethered, free of responsibility. I turned back to the nurse, my voice low and hoarse as I asked, "Do you know where she went?" She shook her head but hesitated before adding, "I did hear her mention a club, something about a reservation at Eden." The name lodged itself in my mind like a curse, and in that moment, one thing became painfully, terrifyingly clear. If Jessica thought she could abandon my son while he lay on the edge of death, she was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. I sat there in the dim hospital room, the faint beeping of the heart monitor filling the silence, my hand clutching Daniel's as though holding on to him would keep him anchored to this world, and as I stared at his pale face, my mind spiraled back through the years, unearthing memories I had buried deep beneath layers of love and obligation, memories that now felt poisoned by betrayal. I remembered the day Daniel was born, how I held him in my arms and promised silently that I would give him everything I never had, that he would never know the struggles I endured, and for decades I kept that promise without question. I worked double shifts for years, waking before sunrise and returning home long after sunset, my body aching, my hands rough and blistered, but I didn't complain because every sacrifice had a purpose. Daniel's future. I remembered the nights I stayed awake calculating bills, shifting numbers around like puzzle pieces, making sure there was always enough for his tuition, his books, his housing, even when it meant I went without new clothes, without vacations, without rest. I thought of the day he got into college, how proud I felt seeing the acceptance letter in his hands, and I remembered writing the first of many checks, knowing that every cent I gave him was an investment in his happiness. Then Jessica came into the picture. At first, I wanted to like her. I really did, because Daniel adored her, and I wanted to believe she loved him as fiercely as he loved her. She was charming when we first met, polite, sweet even, but little cracks began to show as the months passed, subtle comments about money, hints about the life she wanted, the trips she dreamed of, the expensive restaurants she liked to visit. I thought it was harmless at first, the way young people dream big. But soon it became clear she wasn't dreaming, she was demanding. And Daniel, blinded by love, wanted to give her everything. When he couldn't, I stepped in, over and over again. I paid for their extravagant wedding, the one Jessica insisted had to be perfect. Even though the cost made my chest tighten when I signed the checks, I helped them secure the house she fell in love with, covering the down payment so they wouldn't start their marriage buried in debt. Every time she wanted something Daniel couldn't afford, a designer bag, a weekend getaway, the latest phone, I found a way to make it happen, convincing myself it was for Daniel's happiness. And I did it all quietly, without resentment, or so I thought, because I believed they were building a life together, a partnership where love and loyalty came before everything else. But sitting here now, watching my son hooked up to machines, knowing Jessica was out there somewhere, laughing, drinking, and living as if she weren't bound by vows or responsibility, I felt the bitter sting of realization creep into my chest. All those years, all those sacrifices, every dollar, every sleepless night, every decision I made to give them comfort and security, was it all for nothing? The seeds of betrayal had been planted long ago. I just hadn't seen them sprout until now, and as that cold truth settled over me, I knew that everything I thought I understood about my family was about to change forever. The hospital walls were closing in on me, the steady beeping of Daniel's heart monitor pounding in my head like a warning I couldn't ignore, and as I sat there watching my son fight for every shallow breath, the image of Jessica out there somewhere, laughing, drinking, and celebrating, became unbearable, until finally I couldn't sit still any longer. I left the hospital and stepped into the thick Vegas night, the neon lights blinding, the sounds of music and laughter spilling out into the streets like mockery. Every nerve in my body was buzzing with anger as I searched for Eden, the club the nurse had mentioned, my hands shaking on the steering wheel as I drove through the city. When I finally arrived, the line outside snaked down the block. Young, beautiful people dressed in glitter and silk, their voices raised with excitement, while inside, I imagined the pounding bass and flashing lights drowning out any thought of the world beyond those doors. I walked up to the entrance, ignoring the confused stares of the people in line, my chest heaving with each breath. "I'm looking for Jessica Carter," I told the bouncer, my voice low and steady despite the storm raging inside me. He eyed me carefully, then finally nodded toward the entrance. "She's in the VIP section," he muttered, and the words burned like acid in my gut. I stepped inside, the sound hitting me like a physical force. Music so loud it rattled my ribs, the air thick with sweat, perfume, and alcohol. Lights flashed violently across the crowded room, bodies swaying in rhythm, laughter erupting everywhere, and I pushed my way through the chaos, my mind fixed on one thing: finding her. When I finally spotted her, sitting on a plush white couch in the roped-off VIP area, the sight stopped me cold. Jessica was draped in a shimmering silver dress, her hair perfectly styled, a glass of champagne in her hand, surrounded by strangers who leaned close, laughing at something she had just said. And she was laughing too, full, careless laughter that cut through the pounding music and pierced straight into my chest. My son was lying in a hospital bed, his body weak and cold, fighting for his life, and his wife was here, glowing under neon lights, basking in the attention of people she had just met. I stood there watching her, my fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms, the heat of betrayal burning through me until I thought I might explode. I forced my way past the velvet rope and stepped into the VIP area, ignoring the protests of the staff, my eyes locked on her. "Jessica," I said, my voice sharp and commanding, and she turned, startled at first, then annoyed as her expression hardened. "What the hell are you doing here?" she snapped, her tone laced with irritation, as if I had interrupted something important. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, because every ounce of rage and heartbreak was clawing its way to the surface. But when I finally found my voice, it came out low and cold, a promise wrapped in steel. "Daniel is dying," I said, each word deliberate, heavy with fury. "And you're here, partying." Her smirk faltered for the briefest moment before returning, her expression shifting into something dismissive and cruel, and in that instant, I realized this was only the beginning. The real confrontation had yet to come. The music pounded around us, lights flashing violently. But all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears as I stood there in the middle of that crowded VIP lounge, my fists clenched at my sides, my chest rising and falling with sharp, uneven breaths, while Jessica sat lazily on that pristine white couch, swirling her champagne like she didn't have a care in the world. The people around us glanced up in mild curiosity, their conversations faltering as they sensed the tension building, but Jessica didn't even bother to stand, her posture relaxed, her face painted with irritation rather than guilt. "You shouldn't be here," she said coolly, brushing a strand of perfectly styled hair away from her face, her voice carrying just enough venom to make my stomach twist. "This is not the place for this, and frankly, neither is your son. I told him to stay home and rest. If he's in the hospital, that's on him." My breath caught as I stared at her, stunned into silence for a moment as the weight of her words sank in. "On him?" I repeated slowly, my voice low but shaking with restrained fury. "Jessica, he's dying, and you're blaming him?" She leaned back against the couch, crossing her legs deliberately, the sparkle of her diamond-studded heels catching the club's lights as though mocking me. "He's always been weak," she said flatly, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, her tone sharp and dismissive. "I warned him that working those long hours would burn him out, but he never listens. He pushes himself too hard, and now look at where it's gotten him. And don't you dare stand there judging me when I've had to deal with his problems for years. You think it's easy being married to someone who can't even keep up?" My body went cold, the room spinning for a moment as her words struck like a slap to the face, and yet she kept going, each sentence more cutting than the last, her voice rising above the music until more and more people were turning to watch. "Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed?" she hissed, her polished nails tapping against the stem of her champagne glass. "I gave up my life for him, my freedom, my dreams, and for what? So I could sit at home with a man too tired to go out, too broke to give me the life I deserve? I'm 28 years old, and you expect me to waste my youth taking care of someone who can't even take care of himself? He ruined my life." A murmur rippled through the onlookers, but I barely heard them. My vision tunneled, the flashing lights blurring as I stared at this woman who had stood beside my son on their wedding day, who had promised to love him unconditionally, who had sworn in sickness and in health, and now here she was, spitting venom and arrogance while he lay hooked up to machines, fighting to stay alive. You ungrateful little girl," I managed finally, my voice trembling but steady enough to cut through the music and chatter. "I gave you everything. I gave him everything, and you stand here blaming him while you sit in a club drinking champagne?" Jessica rolled her eyes, letting out a short, sharp laugh, the sound colder than the air conditioning blasting from above. "Don't get dramatic," she said, rising finally to her feet, standing nose to nose with me, her perfume overwhelming in its sweetness. "I didn't sign up for this. I didn't marry him to play nurse. If that makes me the bad guy in your little fatherly fantasy, then so be it. I'm not going to apologize for wanting more than this pathetic life." The words settled like poison between us, the weight of them pressing down on my chest until it was hard to breathe. And as she turned away from me to rejoin her laughing friends, something inside me shifted, something deep and cold and unyielding. In that moment, standing under the neon lights of that crowded club, surrounded by strangers' laughter and music that no longer reached me, I knew this wasn't just betrayal, this was war, and I was done playing the fool. I stood frozen near the edge of the VIP section, my mind spinning, my chest aching with a weight I couldn't shake, and though the confrontation with Jessica had left me shaking with anger, I couldn't bring myself to leave just yet, something deep in my gut warning me that there was more lies, more poison, more truth hiding beneath that arrogant facade she wore like armor. I slipped into the shadow of a towering pillar, half hidden from view, my fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms, and that's when I heard her voice, sharp and clear above the pounding bass, carrying across the lounge, like a blade slicing through the noise. "God, he's so pathetic," Jessica was saying to the woman sitting beside her, a tall brunette dressed in sequins who leaned in close, hanging on every venomous word. "I swear, if I have to listen to one more story about how hard he's working for our future, I'll scream. I didn't marry him to live like this. I married him for what I thought I was getting: the money, the security, the house, the life I deserve." The words hit me like a sledgehammer, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The club around me dissolving into a blur of flashing lights and distorted sound as her voice cut through everything else. "Honestly," Jessica continued, taking a long sip of champagne before leaning back with a smirk, "I thought marrying Daniel would mean never having to worry again. But he works himself half to death, and we're still barely scraping by compared to my friends. Do you know how embarrassing it is showing up to these parties with a husband who looks like he hasn't slept in years? I deserve better." The brunette chuckled softly, murmuring something I couldn't catch, and Jessica leaned in closer, lowering her voice but not enough to escape my ears. "The way I see it," she said, her tone dripping with casual cruelty, "I just have to wait. If he dies from exhaustion or whatever's wrong with him, I cash out. The insurance, the house, the savings, all of it comes to me. And if not, well, maybe I'll make sure it happens sooner rather than later." She laughed then, a sound so cold and hollow it made my stomach turn, and her friend joined in, their laughter blending with the thrum of the music like some sick, mocking symphony. My hands trembled violently, rage and disbelief crashing over me in waves so intense I thought I might collapse right there on the glossy marble floor. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every cent I'd poured into their lives played like a cruel movie in my head, overlaid by the sound of her laughter and those words, "cash out," echoing louder and louder until they were all I could hear. I pressed myself against the pillar, forcing my breathing to slow, forcing myself not to storm over and drag her out of that booth by her perfectly manicured hand, because now wasn't the time. No, now I had something far more powerful than confrontation, the truth. And as I stood there, cold and still in the shadows, I made myself a silent promise she would regret ever saying those words, and she would never see it coming. I returned to the hospital just before dawn, the weight of Jessica's words still echoing in my head, each syllable like a nail being driven deeper into my chest, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to learn. The hallway lights were dim, the sterile silence almost oppressive as I walked toward the nurse's station, my mind buzzing with rage and confusion, needing answers, needing clarity. I asked to speak with someone from administration, someone who could explain Daniel's situation in full, not just medically, but financially, legally, everything. A young administrator escorted me into a small office tucked away behind the main reception area, where a middle-aged man in a navy suit waited, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Carter," he said gently, motioning for me to sit, "I understand you're Daniel's father. I think it's important we review a few things regarding his care." His tone made my stomach knot, and I nodded slowly, bracing myself. He opened a thick folder with Daniel's name across the top and began flipping through documents, his eyes scanning lines of fine print I could barely make out through the haze of exhaustion and dread. "Daniel's insurance is active," he explained softly, "but I thought you should know that your daughter-in-law, Jessica, is listed as the sole beneficiary. She has full decision-making authority over his treatment and access to his accounts." My brows furrowed, my heartbeat kicking into overdrive. "What do you mean, full authority?" I asked, my voice tight and low. The administrator hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "According to the documents we have on file, Mr. Carter, she has power of attorney. It was signed shortly after their marriage, which means she has legal control over all financial and medical decisions on Daniel's behalf." I stared at him, unable to process the weight of what he was saying. That doesn't make sense," I stammered, shaking my head. "Daniel would never agree to something like that. He wouldn't hand over his entire life without talking to me first." The administrator looked uncomfortable, lowering his voice as he leaned forward slightly. "I'm not here to speculate, sir, but I can tell you this much: these documents were filed unusually quickly. Most couples don't consolidate property, savings, and insurance beneficiaries within weeks of marriage unless there's a reason. I'd advise you to review the paperwork carefully." A cold realization began to claw its way through me, heavy and suffocating. I had heard Jessica's words ringing in my ears all night, "I cash out." And now, as the administrator slid copies of the signed documents across the desk, her intentions became horrifyingly clear. Jessica had control over everything: the insurance policy, the house, Daniel's savings, every asset he had worked himself into the ground for. She had manipulated him, trapped him into signing away his future without ever telling me, and now, while he lay hooked up to machines fighting for his life, she stood to gain everything if he didn't make it. I clenched the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white, bile rising in my throat as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't negligence. This wasn't immaturity. This was calculated. Jessica hadn't just abandoned my son in his time of need. She had built an entire safety net for herself, one that relied on his suffering. I took the documents with a trembling hand, my breath shallow, my mind racing with anger so sharp it felt like a blade pressed against my ribs, and in that moment, staring down at the signatures that sealed my son's fate, one thing became painfully clear. Jessica wasn't just selfish or cruel, she was dangerous, and if I didn't act fast, she was going to destroy everything Daniel had ever worked for. I sat alone in the dim hospital chapel, the silence so heavy it pressed down on my chest, the faint scent of candle wax clinging to the air as though it was trying to soothe wounds far too deep to heal. And for the first time since arriving in Vegas, I let myself feel everything I had been holding back. The exhaustion, the heartbreak, the anger, it all crashed into me at once, tearing through me like a storm I couldn't escape. My son, my Daniel, was lying 2 floors above me, his body weak and battered, machines doing the work his lungs no longer could, while the woman who promised to love him in sickness and in health laughed and drank in some neon-lit club, plotting how to cash out on his suffering. I had replayed her words over and over again in my head, each repetition cutting deeper than the last, and now I couldn't tell if it was my grief or my rage that was burning hotter in my chest. I thought about the decades of sacrifice, every hour I spent working until my back ached and my hands bled, every dollar I scraped together to give Daniel a better life, every decision I made believing that if I just gave enough, loved enough, protected enough, he would always be safe. And yet here we were, trapped in this nightmare, betrayed by the one person he trusted most, and the weight of my failure as a father settled like lead in my stomach. I should have seen through her sooner. I should have stopped her before she ever had the chance to sink her claws into him, but I hadn't, and now Daniel was paying the price. That guilt should have crushed me, but instead it did something else. It ignited something cold and relentless deep inside me, a resolve so sharp it cut through the fog of despair and gave me clarity I hadn't felt in years. I wiped at my face, realizing too late that tears had been slipping down my cheeks, and as I stared at the flickering candle flames on the altar, a single, unshakable thought took root in my mind and refused to let go. I will not let her win. I will not let Jessica take one more thing from my son. She might have manipulated him into signing away control. She might have abandoned him when he needed her most, and she might believe she's already secured her victory, but she has no idea who she's up against now. She sees me as weak, as old, as someone she can deceive and walk over the way she's done for years, but she doesn't understand that everything I've endured, every hardship, every sacrifice, every scar on these hands has prepared me for this moment. I will protect Daniel's legacy with everything I have left, and I will dismantle the future she's built for herself piece by piece until there's nothing left for her to stand on. She will regret underestimating me. She will regret every lie, every calculated signature, every night she chose herself over my son. And when I'm done, when the truth comes crashing down on her like a tidal wave, she'll finally know what it feels like to lose everything she thought she had stolen. This isn't just about revenge anymore. This is about justice, and I will not stop until it's mine. The next morning, after a sleepless night sitting by Daniel's bedside, I left the hospital with a single purpose burning in my chest, the kind of cold determination that stripped away hesitation and left only action. The city was waking up around me, Vegas sunlight spilling harshly over streets littered with last night's sins, but I barely noticed any of it as I drove downtown to the law offices the hospital administrator had quietly recommended. The glass doors swung open into a sleek, modern lobby buzzing with quiet efficiency, and within minutes I was seated across from a man named Richard Hale, a sharp, composed attorney whose reputation for handling high-stakes family cases preceded him. He was mid-40s, crisp navy suit, every movement precise, his gaze cutting straight through me as though he could already sense the war I was preparing to wage. "Mr. Carter," he began calmly, sliding a legal pad in front of him, "I understand your son's medical and financial situation, but before we discuss solutions, I need you to confirm every detail you know about Jessica's control over his assets." My hands trembled slightly as I placed the thick folder of documents I'd retrieved from the hospital onto his desk, my voice steady even as anger simmered beneath every word. "She has power of attorney, sole beneficiary on his insurance, full control over the property and savings. She manipulated him into signing everything after they married, and now she's sitting back, waiting to cash out while my son fights for his life." Richard's expression didn't change, but his pen moved swiftly across the page as he made notes, his calm professionalism an anchor against the storm raging inside me. "If what you're saying is accurate," he said evenly, flipping through the papers, "there may be vulnerabilities in her control. Nevada has very specific laws about power of attorney agreements, especially when they're executed under questionable circumstances." He adjusted his glasses, scanning a particular page with sharp precision. "For example, if we can prove coercion, manipulation, or misrepresentation, we can challenge the validity of these documents in court." I leaned forward, my voice low but urgent. "She coerced him. I know she did. I don't have hard evidence yet, but I heard her with my own ears. She admitted she married him for money. She plans to take everything if he dies." Richard nodded thoughtfully, closing the folder and meeting my gaze squarely. "Then we start by locking down every financial pathway she has access to. I'll file an emergency petition to place Daniel's assets under protective control until he's capable of making his own decisions again. We'll freeze all shared accounts and flag the insurance policy to prevent any payout without a court review." A wave of relief, mingled with adrenaline, surged through me as his words sank in for the first time since arriving in Vegas. There was hope, a path forward, a way to fight back against the trap Jessica had built so carefully. Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression cool but resolute. "But this won't be easy," he warned. "She'll fight. And if she has access to those funds now, we have to move fast before she drains everything." I nodded without hesitation, my jaw tight, my voice like steel. "Do whatever it takes. Spare no effort, no expense. I don't care how messy it gets. I don't care how long it takes. She doesn't get a cent more, not while I'm still breathing." Richard extended his hand, his grip firm and unyielding, and in that moment, an unspoken alliance formed between us. Jessica thought she had already won, but she had no idea the ground beneath her was about to shift, no idea that every weapon she thought she held was about to be stripped away. And as I left that office with Richard's plan in motion, I felt the first spark of something I hadn't felt in days, power returning to me, piece by piece, ready to be used against her. Richard wasted no time putting me in touch with a private investigator he trusted, a man named Marcus Lane, who came highly recommended for his ability to uncover the kinds of secrets people spend their entire lives trying to hide. By that afternoon, I was sitting across from him in a small office, tucked behind an unmarked door on the outskirts of the Strip, the hum of traffic outside, muffled by the heavy blinds pulled tight across the windows. Marcus was calm and methodical, his sharp eyes scanning me as he clicked a pen and opened a slim notepad. "If there's something to find on Jessica Carter," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "I'll find it." I handed him every detail I had: her phone number, her email, the clubs she frequented, who the people she spent time with, and he nodded without a word, his face unreadable as he began piecing together the threads of her life. Over the next 48 hours, Marcus kept me updated with brief, cryptic texts and late-night calls, each one peeling back another layer of the carefully constructed persona Jessica had built for herself, and with every revelation, the image of her as a shallow, selfish woman dissolved into something far darker and more dangerous. First came the debts. She was drowning in them: maxed-out credit cards, unpaid personal loans, overdue bills, and a string of failed business ventures that had left her name blacklisted with several lenders. There were collection agencies circling her like vultures, lawsuits pending in 2 states, and bank accounts so overdrawn they were practically empty. And then came the affairs. Marcus unearthed dozens of messages, private chats, and discreet rendezvous spanning nearly their entire marriage, with at least 3 different men, one of them a wealthy club owner in Vegas, another a married executive from Los Angeles, and the third, shockingly, a man she'd been seeing since before she even met Daniel. Each discovery was like a knife twisting deeper, and yet the worst was still to come. Marcus sent me a folder late that night, encrypted and password protected, and when I opened it, my hands shook so violently I nearly dropped my phone. Jessica had been orchestrating something far more sinister than I imagined: fraudulent insurance applications, forged signatures, hidden accounts routed through shell companies in Nevada and California, all designed to siphon money wherever she could. She wasn't just careless or greedy, she was calculating, meticulous, and ruthless in ways I hadn't believed possible until I saw the evidence laid bare in front of me. One message Marcus uncovered stopped me cold. A chat between Jessica and one of her lovers dated just a week before Daniel collapsed. "Once he's gone, it's over," she had written casually, followed by a string of laughing emojis. Finally, I can breathe again. I sat there in the dim glow of my phone screen, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts, my chest tight with a fury so deep it felt like my bones were vibrating. All those years I'd spent protecting Daniel, all the sacrifices, the loans, the endless patience I'd given her, entitlement, and behind my back, behind his back, she was building a life designed to erase him from the picture entirely. My vision blurred as I scrolled through image after image, document after document, each one a brick in the damning case Marcus had assembled. There was no longer any doubt, no longer any hesitation. Jessica wasn't just planning to walk away with everything, she was willing to destroy my son's life to do it. And as I sat there, my grip tightening around the phone until my knuckles turned white, one thought burned hotter than everything else. She had buried herself, and she didn't even know it yet. I returned to Richard's office the following morning with Marcus's evidence in hand, my body running on adrenaline instead of sleep, the folder of documents clutched so tightly in my grip that the edges had crumpled under the pressure of my fingers. Richard was already waiting when I arrived, seated behind his immaculate desk, the soft hum of the city below drowned out by the storm brewing between us. I dropped the folder in front of him without a word, and as he flipped through the files, his usual composure cracked just enough for me to see the spark of disbelief in his sharp eyes. "This is extensive," he murmured, scanning images, text logs, bank statements, and fraudulent insurance documents with the practiced precision of a man who'd seen more than his fair share of deception, but rarely this level of calculation. "If even half of this holds up, Jessica's going to have a very serious problem on her hands." I leaned forward, my voice low but steady despite the rage coiled tight in my chest. "It all holds up. I want her stripped of everything, her access to Daniel's accounts, her control over his treatment, her claim to his insurance, the house, all of it. I don't want her touching a single cent." Richard nodded slowly, tapping the edge of the folder thoughtfully before closing it and sliding it back toward me. "Then we move fast. We'll file an emergency petition to freeze all of Daniel's assets immediately and submit a motion to suspend her power of attorney pending an investigation. But freezing the money isn't enough. We need to dismantle her credibility entirely. If we show the court she acted fraudulently, not only do we cut her off from any financial gain, but we also open her up to criminal liability. That gives us leverage." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm, though the weight of Jessica's betrayal burned hotter with every passing second. "Do it," I said firmly, my voice carrying the kind of finality that left no room for argument. Richard adjusted his cufflinks, already pulling files and drafting documents, his movements quick and efficient, but then he glanced up at me with a calculating expression. "We'll need to strengthen our case with witness testimony," he explained. "People who can attest to her behavior, the nurses who saw her leave the hospital, staff from Eden, maybe even her so-called friends she bragged to about cashing out. If she thought she could run her mouth without consequence, we're going to make sure every careless word comes back to haunt her." I nodded, already recalling every name, every face, every person who had crossed paths with her while Daniel lay fighting for his life. "I'll get you everything you need," I promised, the words tasting like steel on my tongue. Richard leaned back slightly, his gaze steady, his voice even but sharp as a knife. "Once we have this, we can request a court order to revoke her access to Daniel's insurance and savings. By the time she realizes what's happening, the walls will already be closing in." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the faintest flicker of control returning, a sense of purpose threading through the chaos. Jessica thought she had played the perfect game, signing papers, forging signatures, hiding debts, and weaving lies so carefully she believed herself untouchable. But what she didn't know was that she had already provided me every weapon I needed to destroy her. I left Richard's office with a growing fire in my chest, every step deliberate, my jaw set with cold resolve. The trap was laid, the evidence secured, and the legal strike already in motion. She wouldn't see it coming, and when it hit, it wouldn't just ruin her plans, it would expose her for everything she really was. And this time, she wouldn't escape. I had just finished another long discussion with Daniel's doctors and returned to his room when the sound of loud, clumsy footsteps echoed down the hallway, drawing every nurse's attention. Jessica staggered into the ICU, the strong stench of alcohol preceding her, her silver heels clicking unevenly against the polished floor as she clutched a half-empty designer purse under one arm and her phone in the other. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged, but the smug grin on her face was intact, and my stomach twisted at the sight of her. She waltzed into the room like she owned it, her glassy eyes darting lazily toward Daniel's fragile body hooked up to tubes and machines, and instead of concern or grief, there was something disturbingly casual in her expression, as though this was just an inconvenient pit stop between parties. "Well," she slurred, leaning against the doorframe, "he's still alive. Guess the machines are doing their job." The words punched the air out of my lungs, and I froze, gripping the side of Daniel's bed so hard my knuckles whitened as I struggled to control the rage boiling under my skin. A nurse stepped forward immediately, her voice sharp but polite, asking Jessica to lower her voice out of respect for the other patients, but Jessica waved her off like she was nothing more than an annoying fly buzzing in her face. "Relax," she snapped, tossing her phone carelessly onto the chair by the bed. "It's not like he can hear me anyway. And even if he can, maybe this will motivate him to get better faster." Then she turned her attention to me, her smile lopsided, cruel, deliberate. "Did you know, Daddy Carter," she drawled mockingly, "that the house will sell for close to $800,000 once this is all over? I had a realtor friend run the numbers last week. Market's hot right now. By the time we're done, I'll be sitting pretty in L.A. Maybe even Malibu if I negotiate right." The sound of her voice, those vile words spoken over my son's hospital bed, snapped something deep inside me that I didn't even realize had been holding on until that very moment. My blood ran cold, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts as I stared at her, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might shatter. I wanted to scream, to throw her out of this hospital and into the streets where she belonged, but the rational part of me forced myself to stay silent, to memorize every word, every smirk, every careless laugh. Because this was no longer just betrayal, this was ammunition. The nurses exchanged uneasy glances, their faces pale, one of them discreetly jotting down notes as Jessica prattled on about what she'd do with the insurance payout, how she'd finally be free, how at least something good would come out of this situation. She didn't even try to lower her voice, oblivious or uncaring of the staff listening, and I knew then that I didn't need to fight her here, not yet. She was handing me everything I needed, digging her own grave with every drunken word that spilled from her lips. As she stumbled out of the room, laughing to herself, the fury that had been simmering inside me solidified into something colder, sharper, unstoppable. Whatever hesitation remained in me dissolved completely, replaced by a singular, unyielding vow I would end her game, strip her of everything she thought she owned, expose her for every lie, every fraud, every crime, and make sure she never touched a single cent of my son's life again. The trap was set, but now I wasn't just fighting to protect Daniel's legacy. I was fighting to destroy her, and I would not stop until there was nothing left of the life she thought she'd stolen. The morning of the hearing, I arrived at the Clark County Courthouse early, the weight of weeks of sleepless nights pressing against my shoulders, yet beneath the exhaustion burned a cold, steady resolve that carried me forward with purpose. Richard met me at the entrance, his sharp navy suit immaculate as always, a thick leather briefcase in hand that contained every weapon we needed to dismantle Jessica's carefully constructed empire of lies. As we walked through the echoing marble halls, he briefed me one last time, his voice low and measured. "The judge has already reviewed our emergency petition," he said, his eyes steady on mine. "Given the evidence Marcus uncovered and the witness statements from the hospital staff, I'm confident we'll get the injunction granted today. She won't see it coming." Those words were the only comfort I had, though my pulse still hammered like a war drum as we stepped into the courtroom, the heavy wooden doors closing behind us with a soft but final thud. Jessica was already seated at the defendant's table, dressed sharply in a fitted cream blazer, her hair perfectly styled, her expression composed. But when she spotted me walking in alongside Richard, I saw the flicker of confusion cross her face, followed by irritation, and then something else, unease. She hadn't expected me to fight back. The judge entered moments later, his gavel striking once to silence the low murmur of the room, and proceedings began immediately. Richard stood first, his voice calm but commanding as he laid out the foundation of our petition. He spoke of Daniel's critical condition, the power of attorney documents, the suspiciously rushed consolidation of assets, and the overwhelming evidence of Jessica's financial misconduct. Every forged signature, every hidden account, every incriminating text and phone record Marcus had unearthed. He presented sworn affidavits from 2 nurses who confirmed Jessica left the hospital during Daniel's most critical hours, and statements from witnesses at Eden who overheard her boasting about the insurance payout. With each revelation, I watched Jessica's composure chip away piece by piece, her polished facade cracking under the weight of the truth as her attorneys shuffled nervously beside her, whispering frantically while she stared straight ahead, lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Then came the decisive moment. Richard requested an immediate injunction, freezing all marital assets, insurance payouts, property titles, and joint accounts until the court could complete a full investigation into potential fraud. The judge leaned back in his chair, scanning the documents carefully before glancing over at Jessica, whose sudden burst of indignation shattered the tense silence. "This is outrageous!" she snapped, her voice sharp and brittle, echoing through the chamber. "He's trying to steal what's mine. Daniel gave me control. This is my legal right." But the judge cut her off swiftly, his tone firm and unyielding. "You will remain silent until addressed, Mrs. Carter," he said coldly before turning back to Richard. "The petition is well supported, effective immediately. All marital assets and associated accounts are frozen pending further review." The words rang through the courtroom like a verdict, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a rush of triumph course through me, sharp and electric. Jessica sat rigidly in her chair, her cheeks flushed, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the table so tightly her knuckles blanched, but her fury couldn't mask the panic flickering behind her eyes. She had walked into this room believing she held all the power, but she had underestimated me, underestimated how far I would go to protect my son and everything he had built. As we exited the courtroom, Richard leaned close and murmured, "This was just the first strike. Now we dismantle her, piece by piece." I nodded without speaking, my gaze fixed straight ahead, knowing deep down this was far from over, but for the first time the battlefield had shifted, and Jessica had no idea how quickly her carefully built kingdom was about to crumble. The hospital conference room was packed, every seat taken, the air so thick with tension it felt heavy in my lungs. I had asked for this meeting, requested that Daniel's closest friends, extended family, and key hospital staff be present, because the time for quiet maneuvering was over. Jessica had hidden behind her polished mask for far too long, and now the truth would be dragged into the light where she could no longer twist it to her advantage. Richard stood beside me, calm and collected as always, holding the thick binder of evidence Marcus had compiled, while I gripped the edge of the table, my jaw tight, my knuckles white. Jessica walked in late, as if she wanted to make a statement, dressed in a sleek black jumpsuit, her head held high, sunglasses perched arrogantly on top of her perfectly styled hair. She gave me a passing glance, cold and dismissive, before seating herself with a dramatic sigh, as though this gathering were an inconvenience to her rather than the turning point of her life. The room went silent until Richard began, his voice steady, projecting authority and control. "We've called this meeting," he said evenly, "to clarify certain facts regarding Daniel Carter's financial, medical, and personal situation. Some of the information we've uncovered is disturbing, and given the impact on his care, everyone here deserves full transparency." Jessica rolled her eyes with an exaggerated huff, muttering something under her breath, but Richard ignored her entirely as he opened the binder and began presenting the evidence piece by piece. First came the debts. He displayed copies of overdrawn bank statements, unpaid loans, and maxed-out credit cards, projecting them on a screen at the front of the room for everyone to see. Gasps rippled across the room as he detailed the hundreds of thousands of dollars Jessica owed to lenders and collection agencies, debts Daniel had never even known existed. Then came the affairs. Marcus's investigation had been thorough, and the receipts were undeniable: dozens of messages, timestamps, photos, even hotel invoices connecting her to multiple men during her marriage. The silence grew heavier as images flashed across the screen, friends shifting uncomfortably in their seats while family members whispered in disbelief. Jessica sat motionless at first, but then the color began to drain from her face, her perfect composure unraveling with every revelation. Finally, Richard revealed the forged signatures, the fraudulent insurance applications, and the shell accounts designed to siphon money behind Daniel's back. He played an audio clip Marcus had recovered from Eden's VIP lounge, Jessica's own voice crystal clear as she laughed with her friend about cashing out on Daniel's death. The reaction in the room was immediate, and explosive. Nurses exchanged horrified looks, family members erupted with anger, and even Daniel's closest friends stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. Jessica shot to her feet, her chair screeching loudly against the floor, her voice rising in desperation. "This is a setup!" she screamed, her usual polished control cracking into jagged fragments. "He's lying. They're all lying. None of this proves anything." But Richard remained calm, sliding the signed marriage contracts and power of attorney papers across the table, highlighting inconsistencies and timestamps that painted a damning picture of manipulation and deceit. "You took advantage of a man who trusted you," he said coldly. "You lied, you cheated, and you tried to drain his life's work while abandoning him when he needed you most." The weight of his words settled over the room like lead, and for the first time since this began, Jessica had no clever retort, no smug smile, no power left to wield. Her friends avoided her gaze. Family members whispered in disgust, and the hospital staff, once neutral observers, now stared at her with open contempt. Standing there in that room, watching the walls of her carefully constructed facade crumble around her, I felt the cold satisfaction of justice begin to take shape. But deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. Jessica had just been exposed, stripped bare in front of everyone, and now it was time to take everything she thought she had secured and leave her with nothing. By the time the meeting ended, Jessica's world had begun to unravel right before her eyes, but it wasn't until the days that followed that the full weight of her downfall became clear. Word spread faster than even I expected, and soon everyone who had once smiled in her presence, everyone who had once envied her perfect life, wanted nothing to do with her. Friends she used to flaunt on social media stopped returning her calls, group chats went silent, and one by one, her carefully curated social circle collapsed like a house of cards. The people she used to drink champagne with at rooftop bars now whispered about her behind closed doors, sharing screenshots, forwarding Marcus's findings, trading gossip about her debts, her affairs, her betrayal. The image she had so meticulously built, the glamorous wife with the enviable marriage and effortless style, was crumbling faster than she could rebuild it. Even her so-called closest friends distanced themselves completely, deleting photos, unfollowing her accounts, and leaving her to drown in the silence she had once weaponized against others. But it wasn't just her social life that fell apart. The hospital made its position clear. After reviewing Richard's filings and the evidence against her, the board invoked its authority to temporarily suspend Jessica's visitation rights, citing concerns about Daniel's emotional well-being should she be allowed near him. When I received the notification, relief flooded through me. But when Jessica stormed into the ICU later that evening, drunk and furious, demanding to see him, the security team intercepted her before she made it past the nurse's station. She shouted, screamed, and called me every name she could think of, but no amount of venom in her voice could undo what she had done. She was escorted out of the hospital under the watchful eyes of staff and patients alike, her protests ringing hollow against the weight of her actions. I'll never forget the look on the nurses' faces that night, the quiet disgust, the way they shook their heads as they whispered to one another, or the silence in the room after she was gone. It was the first time in weeks that the air felt lighter, safer, as though some lingering shadow had finally been pushed out of Daniel's room. Outside the hospital, her life was falling apart even faster. Creditors began calling non-stop. Lawsuits she thought she had hidden were now exposed, and the men she'd been seeing behind Daniel's back wanted nothing more to do with her now that her lies were public knowledge. Her reputation in Vegas, once pristine and envied, was now radioactive. People crossed the street to avoid her, whispers followed her wherever she went, and invitations to the exclusive clubs and events she once thrived on dried up overnight. Jessica had built her entire identity around appearances, status, and control, but now she had none of it. And I watched, silently and without pity, as the empire she thought she had secured crumbled beneath her feet, brick by brick, lie by lie. For the first time since this nightmare began, the balance of power had shifted completely. She was out of Daniel's life, out of his finances, and out of his future. But I knew she wouldn't give up without a fight. I could see it in her eyes when they escorted her out of that hospital, the anger, the humiliation, the desperation. That was fine by me. Let her come at me with everything she has left. Because now, I wasn't just protecting my son. I was making sure she would never recover from what she had done. The morning after Jessica was barred from the hospital, I sat in Richard's office once again, the sunlight spilling through the blinds as we reviewed the court's latest ruling. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the faint weight of hope pushing back against the suffocating darkness. With the injunction secured and Jessica's access to Daniel's accounts fully revoked, the control over his finances had shifted to me finally. I could make sure every dollar, every asset, and every decision was used for his care, not her greed. Richard slid the final stack of documents across the polished mahogany desk, his voice calm and precise, as he explained each page, each signature, each power transferred back into the hands of the person who would protect Daniel, not exploit him. With this, he said firmly, tapping the last page, Jessica can no longer withdraw funds, sell property, or authorize any medical decisions. You have sole authority now." The relief was staggering, but it came tangled with anger, knowing how close she had come to draining everything Daniel had worked for. I left the office and went straight to the bank, freezing her access completely, rerouting all accounts into a secure trust that would safeguard his assets until he recovered. I contacted the insurance company, flagging Jessica's name so she couldn't so much as request a statement without legal clearance. I called his workplace, arranging for his benefits to be redirected to his treatment fund, ensuring his care would remain uninterrupted no matter how long it took. For weeks, I worked tirelessly, every waking hour consumed by managing the finances she had nearly destroyed, while also sitting by Daniel's side, watching as the doctors slowly stabilized him. Without Jessica's interference, everything ran smoother, no sudden requests for upgrades to his room that she never intended to pay for, no unexplained withdrawals, no chaotic decisions designed to benefit her rather than him. The hospital staff, now fully aware of the truth, treated me like an ally, consulting me on every step of Daniel's treatment plan, ensuring he received the best care available. I upgraded his specialists, hired additional nurses for round-the-clock monitoring, and authorized experimental therapies the insurance had previously delayed under Jessica's authorization. And as I watched his vitals improve little by little, day by day, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, my son would pull through this. In those quiet moments by his bedside, I would hold his hand and promise him over and over again that he was safe now, that I had taken back control, that nothing and no one would ever use him or his hard work again. Jessica had tried to turn his entire life into her personal payday, but now the walls had closed around her, cutting her out completely, leaving her with nothing but the wreckage she had created for herself. Daniel's future was secure, his legacy intact, and with every passing day, I felt my resolve harden further. I wasn't just rebuilding what she had tried to destroy, I was fortifying it so tightly that she would never be able to touch it again. This wasn't just protection, this was justice, and it was only the beginning. I saw her again for the last time 2 weeks later, outside the courthouse steps where fate seemed determined to bring our battle to its natural conclusion. The day was hot, the Vegas sun glaring off the polished marble columns, and the crowd from another case spilled into the plaza, their chatter fading into background noise as I stepped out with Richard beside me, the final legal documents in hand, the papers that officially stripped Jessica of any claim to Daniel's assets, property, or future. She was waiting there, leaning against a pillar, sunglasses perched low on her nose, her once flawless composure reduced to something brittle and fractured. Her makeup was heavy enough to hide the dark circles under her eyes, but not the desperation in them as she pushed away from the wall and stumbled toward me. "Please," she started, her voice cracking in a way I had never heard before, and for a brief moment I saw a flicker of the confidence she used to wield, trying to claw its way back. "I made mistakes. I know I did, but you have to understand I never meant for it to go this far." I stopped a few feet away from her, watching as she twisted her hands nervously, her designer bag slipping off her shoulder, her perfectly manicured nails chipped and uneven. The sight of her trying to play fragile after everything she had done should have enraged me, but instead I felt nothing. The fury that once burned inside me had gone cold, replaced by a clarity so sharp it almost felt like peace. "Understand?" I said quietly, my voice low but steady. "I understand perfectly, Jessica. I understand that you manipulated my son. I understand that you forged documents, stole his money, and plotted to cash out on his suffering. I understand that while he was lying in that hospital bed, fighting for his life, you were laughing in VIP booths, bragging about the payout you thought you'd get when he died." Her breath caught at those words, her lower lip trembling, and for the first time, her mask cracked completely. She reached out a hand as though touching me could somehow undo the damage, but I stepped back, and the motion seemed to crush her more than any words I could have said. "I was scared," she whispered desperately, her voice breaking as she glanced around, aware of the eyes watching us. I didn't know what to do. I panicked, and yes, I said things I didn't mean. But please, I love Daniel. I still love him. Please, just let me make this right. I shook my head slowly, holding her gaze without flinching, my voice like steel now, stripped of anger, stripped of mercy. "You don't exist to us anymore, Jessica. Whatever life you thought you had with Daniel, whatever future you imagined, it's over. You are erased from his life, from mine, from everything we've built. You don't get another chance. You don't get forgiveness." Her face went pale, her lips parting soundlessly, as though she wanted to argue, to beg, to fight, but no words came. The silence stretched between us, heavy and final, until at last she turned away, pulling her sunglasses down to hide her tears as she disappeared into the crowd. I stood there watching her go, my chest steady, my hands no longer shaking, because this was the last time Jessica Carter would ever cast a shadow over our lives. And as I walked away, the sun beating down on my shoulders, I felt the weight of months of fury and grief lift, replaced by something I had nearly forgotten existed: peace. Weeks passed after that final confrontation, and slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, life began to feel different. The chaos that had consumed every waking moment of my days started to settle, replaced by a steady rhythm I had nearly forgotten was possible. Daniel was still in the hospital, but now he was improving, his color returning little by little, his breathing stronger with each passing day. Every morning I sat by his bedside, holding his hand, watching as his body fought its way back piece by piece, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to hope without fear. The doctors were optimistic now, their tones lighter during updates, and I could see relief etched into their faces when they spoke of his progress. Without Jessica's interference, his treatment plan became streamlined, efficient, focused entirely on what he needed instead of what she wanted. Every decision was made with his recovery in mind, every resource directed toward giving him the best chance possible, and as I watched him regain his strength, it felt like reclaiming pieces of the son I thought I might lose forever. The family, too, began to heal. Those who had once doubted me, who believed Jessica's polished facade, came forward one by one to apologize, their shame written plainly in their voices and their eyes. The truth had reached everyone now, friends, relatives, even distant acquaintances, and while the betrayal still stung, there was comfort in knowing that justice had prevailed, that no one saw her as anything other than what she truly was. The home Daniel and Jessica once shared was safe now, secured under my guardianship until he was well enough to decide what he wanted to do with it. The accounts were locked down, the fraudulent policies dismantled, and every penny Jessica had tried to siphon away was recovered or frozen beyond her reach. Piece by piece, we rebuilt the foundation she had tried to tear apart, ensuring Daniel's legacy and future were protected not just for him, but for generations to come. As for Jessica, she faded into silence, her once envied reputation obliterated by the weight of her own actions. The friends who once orbited her vanished entirely. Creditors chased her relentlessly, and the invitations to the glamorous parties she once lived for dried up without a trace. Whatever empire she thought she had built had crumbled to dust, and though part of me had once longed for revenge, I realized now that I didn't need to lift another finger. Her downfall was complete, and she had orchestrated every step of it herself. One evening, I sat by Daniel's bed, the soft golden light of sunset filtering through the blinds, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to exhale fully, to feel the tension slip from my shoulders. I reached out, brushing his hair back gently, and whispered, "You're safe now, son. It's over." My voice cracked as the words left my lips, but for once, the tears that came weren't born of fear or grief. They were of relief, of gratitude, of finally knowing that justice had been served. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the steady beeping of the machines and the faint hum of the hospital beyond, I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I almost didn't recognize it at first. Peace. Your time means a lot. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, just click the box on the left.